Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today for this installment of our Career Pathway series, Exiting Academia. Today, we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Jackie Norkier, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in gamification into the exciting industry vertical of financial services. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nantra.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series. Dr. G. Nantra here, and today I'm excited to interview Dr. Jackie Norkier all the way from South Africa to talk to us about her career path. Jackie, you have an MS in applied mathematics and a PhD in gamification. And where do you currently work?
So I currently work for a company called Discovery Vitality. We're predominantly based in South Africa, but we do have some partnerships internationally. So some people may or may not have heard of them. What we do predominantly is we are in the financial services and health insurance space. And what Vitality does is we provide wellness solutions to help our medical aid and our health insurance clients manage their risks. So one of the big things we've coined this term, the shared value model, and the thinking is from a risk perspective. If you can help clients manage their health risks, it reduces their claims. And when you reduce their claims, it creates actuarial surplus, which you can then put back into interventions. So it aligns quite closely with my interest in gamification and behavioral science.
Yeah. So anyway, I jumped right into it, but let's talk about your educational background, right? So you started, you work with a company that is focused on healthcare and risk management, and you have this degree in applied math and gamification. Let's delve a little bit into that, because sometimes people are not sure how to go from here to there. So let's talk about your educational background, then we'll talk about how you got started and what you do now.
So when I started studying, the plan was to stay in academia. I was completely convinced. I was ready to start lecturing. I was ready to jump straight from masters into PhD. But it was quite interesting at the time that I did my MSc. There was another person also busy, but he was about 6 months ahead of me. And he submitted first and got his degree first. But our department only had space for one person to lecture. And then I was in a situation where I needed to either apply at other universities to lecture or make the decision whether or not I wanted to go into industry. And at the time, with how some of the South African universities worked, is they also wanted you to have a teaching background. And I wasn't quite ready to commit to another degree in such a fundamentally different field. So I was almost, I wouldn't say forced, but my path veered quite heavily away from academia. But the desire to do a PhD was always there. It's one of those things where I've always enjoyed learning and enjoyed the research aspect of things. And also it's a bit of it was more a personal thing that I wanted to say, like, look, I've got the complete set. I have all my degrees next to each other. But I worked in industry, and I started in a very analytical space because of the applied maths background. It just made sense for me to join one of the statistical teams at Discovery. And then I was there for about 2 years, and then their research and development team restructured, and they did a wide call within the company to see if they could get new people into the research and development team. And when I moved into I moved into that space in about 2015. And up until that point, I was very quant focused, very applied maths, stats. It was all about the numbers. But in the research and development space, I got a lot more exposed to the products that we build, and more exposed to the behavioral science side of things. And that was just such an amazing change, like a paradigm shift for me. And in 2019, I decided that I wanted to pick up the idea of the PhD again, but not in applied maths, in the behavior science and gamification space. And that's sort of, I did my PhD part-time while I was working, which had its own challenges. But then I finished, I actually finished at the start of this year, which was such an amazing, it was so exciting when I got the results that it was finished and passed. I was very excited. So yeah, it's been a very strange, and now that I've got my PhD, I'm starting to re-enter the sphere of academia, but more from a research perspective, and more I'm trying to use this background of practical experience and research to help people bridge the gap. Because what I've seen in my own space is we have a lot of people, there's a lot of practitioners who have practical experience, but they don't necessarily have theoretical background. And there's a lot of people with theoretical background, but they don't know how to jump into the practical space. And I'm trying to see how I can position myself to help people, bridge the two spheres of interest.
This is really interesting. There are people. So thank you for sharing that detailed background. So it looks like you, after you finished your master's degree, you went into industry and you were working, and then you did your PhD on top of that. And that makes sense, because for some people, that's really the thing that works for their lives, right?
Yeah.
I love what you said about people with a theoretical background that don't have the practical skills, and the practical people that don't always have the theoretical background. I think for most academics, it's usually the first, right? It's usually we have a lot of theory, or we've done a lot of things in academia, but we are not sure how to translate it into the real world. So I want us to talk a little bit about that when you were, first of all, let's talk about how you got your current job. Did you just apply online? Did you know people? Did you leverage your network? What was that like?
So I very much leveraged my network. Before I got my job, I got a bit despondent because I was applying at places. I went through a recruitment agency. I went for interviews, but nothing was quite the right fit. And it was strange. So in South Africa, there's a lot of people study engineering or actuarial science. So people, like the companies, know what they're getting when they hire those people. But something like applied mathematics, where it feels very theoretical, the companies didn't really know where I would fit in. So they were not as open to my CV at that point. And, I was, especially in the engineering space and the actuarial space, people would enter the workforce younger. So I had almost 2 years on my peers, but no practical experience to show for it. And it was very difficult for me, because I got to a point where I didn't really know how to progress. But I was in a very lucky position that one of my close family friends is a doctor, and one of her patients worked at Discovery. And I remember calling her after one of my interviews and saying, it's really, I'm struggling, and it's so tough. And her patient's like, "Oh, who was that?" And she's like, "Yeah, no, it's Jackie. This is the person I know. She's looking for a job." And this patient of hers was like, "Well, just have her send me her CV, and I'll see what I can do." And
Right.
I sent through my CV, and it was amazing. Like it worked out so well. He put me into contact with other people in the business, and I interviewed within the business until they could find a spot for me. And I think it's one of those things where, if you come from a very academic background and companies don't know where you fit in, you need someone to champion you. You need someone who will help find a space for you.
Yeah.
Or that
Yeah.
was my experience at the least.
No, it makes a lot of sense, right? And I appreciate the honesty around that, because a lot of the time, I find a lot of academics actually face exactly what you described, right? People, recruiters, and hiring managers sometimes, unless you're going into a very, very, I come from the biomedical sciences, and so if you're going into an R&D role in industry right from academia, it makes a lot of sense because you're doing a lot of the research and the research work you did in academia. But then when you're going from research, being primarily a researcher, to something else, you're so right. People are like, how does this translate? So it's almost like you either have to have somebody advocate for you, like you said, or you have to become so good at convincing people that no, 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 I'm not just a researcher. I also have these other skills that translate, which, so thank you for sharing that, which brings me to the next question, which is, you say they kind of like interviewed with you until they found a spot for you. What do you think were some of the skills, in your estimation, were some of the skills that were maybe not directly, but even indirectly translatable to the role you got into?
So when I immediately started at Discovery, so my master's was in quantum computing, and the team who eventually hired me, the manager told me he had no idea what it meant, but it just sounded so interesting. He just had to have it in his space. And I think that's, I was able to tell a story in a way that he could identify with. So
Right.
even though he didn't know what quantum computing meant, and he didn't know how it could be valuable, and
Right.
in reality, there was no direct application at all, other than being able to say, look, I'm good with numbers, I fit into a quant role. I told it in such a way that he wanted to know more, and he wanted to see how we could use those skills. So I think
Right.
at that point, it was very much the storytelling side of things. But in my current role, what I found the most valuable, translating from the research into practical, is the ability to take like a massive multi-year project where you're the project manager. You have to, if you interviewing people, you have to source them, you have to design your research instruments, you're doing everything from start to finish. Whereas normally in a company you have teams that do that for you. So being able to have all those skills and run that project from start to finish, I found so valuable in my current role,
Yeah.
because no matter what project someone throws at me, I can be like, I've got this. It's not nearly as difficult as what my research was.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense because with most master's programs and PhD programs, you are taking a project from beginning to end, and you're right. You're everything. You're the assistant. You're the project manager. You're the researcher. You're the data collector. Right. You are the data analyst. You're all these things. And
Yeah.
so it makes sense that now in this role you still get to use, and that's what I was saying earlier, that sometimes I feel like we kind of are able to translate it easier when we have skills that kind of look like we are in academia, but maybe not as intensive, and also maybe better paid.
Yes. Yeah.
Probably better paid, right? Anyway, I always like to make fun a little bit of the academic folks. I'm like, you're doing all this work and you're getting paid so little. Anyway, let's not get into that. So thank you for sharing that. So we've talked a little bit about how you got this job and the skills that have been helpful for you in this job. I know you touched on what you do in general, but on a day-to-day basis, I know things may be different, but what does a typical maybe week look like in your life at work?
So in our space, because of the R&D cycle,
Yeah.
It depends very much on where we are in the cycle. So if we are at the start of the cycle, so like at the moment, our team is we're very much at the we've just wrapped up our previous sort of year's launch projects, and now we're kicking off the next phase, or like next year's product development cycle. So at the moment, it's a lot of ideation, it's brainstorming, it's picking up it's almost like starting a research project from scratch, and it's identifying where the gaps are for our clients, where the gaps are in the products. Is there something that we can build on, something that we can improve? So at the moment, it's a very it's less structured,
Yeah.
and a lot more research, reading, speaking to people, which is it's always one of my favorite parts of the product development cycle. As we progress later on in the process, where we are more bedded down on the projects, and I think this is also why I enjoy R&D so much. It's quite comparable to research in that there's almost the ideation phase where you create your problem statements, and then there's the research phase where we gather the information that we need. So it could be a lot of analysis, data gathering, looking at data, and then once you sort of have the information, and also a lot of my day-to-day work is putting all this information together and then taking it to stakeholders to get their buy-in for the next phase.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a big difference between industry and academia. Or from a research perspective, I had a lot more autonomy. So if I decided that I wanted to, interview certain people, or if I wanted to gather certain data, the only restriction was almost the practical side of things and whether it was correct research. Whereas in my industry life, if I have a good idea, no matter how good the idea is, or how strong the data is, or how compelling the argument is, I first have to take it to, my manager, or the execs, or our systems team, or, there's always some stakeholders that you have to get over the line. So on the one hand, my day job is a lot of reading, research, analysis. And then the other side is translating that into a more ingestible way to move forward. And then
Yeah.
once that push-pull is sort of concluded and we've got buy-in on the next steps, it's again translating that into a spec, or, a business requirements document or whatever for our systems team to take over. So it's so in my role, I work with a lot of different teams in the business.
Yeah.
I work with our systems teams, business teams, the business analysts, servicing. So it's taking the product idea and translating it for each of these units, so they can take it and then do their part of the job.
Yeah. When you start, thank you for sharing that. When you started, you talked about the R&D cycle. I think for the people that are outside of this space, that may be foreign to them. Could you define what an R&D cycle is? Does it go from January to December? Does it matter? Like what happens in an R&D cycle, and what is it?
So I think it's probably quite company dependent.
Yes.
In our company, so being in the financial services space and the healthcare space, and I don't know how it works in the States and other markets, but in South Africa, we are our business is very dependent on financial advisors. So we typically don't sell directly to clients often,
Right.
especially in like the life insurance space. It's more the financial advisors that go out and sell the product. So every year we have a big launch event in September where we sort of reveal our products to the financial advisors. I think we kind of mirrored after like the Apple launch. Like every year, there's this big event, and you get everyone to come to to the company,
Yeah.
and we have this beautiful presentation, and we show them the projects. So our launch cycle, our product cycle typically goes from September to September. Sometimes projects run over. We have a mix of, so we call it business as usual projects, where it's doing enhancements to existing things.
Yeah.
And there it tends to be very short bursts, where we'll ideate and then hand it over to the rest of the business. But the big launch projects, we work towards September. So we've just our launch was just now in September. So typically from September to December, it's that ideation, getting ready for the next year, doing our strat days and all that. And then from Jan till about June, we we develop the product. So we'll go through the stakeholders, take them through various iterations, get everything ready. And then from June to about August, we do the speccing and get the systems and technical teams on board, and get things built. So it changes also year to year and project to project, but that's
Yeah.
typically the cycle.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. Because sometimes people don't realize that they, don't realize these cycles. And I love that you said that it is company dependent, because it's a similar thing for us. I don't think in my company we have a defined R&D cycle. I know that we definitely have ideation, and then the R&D, and then the go-to-market strategy and the launch and all that. So understanding some of these terms is also really important as you think about transitioning into a non-academic career. One of the questions I get quite a bit is, I'm trying to get into this ABC space, right? Do you think I need extra certifications or, extra education? And usually I tell them, no, you don't. You just have to know how to tell your story. What would you say to that question as well?
That's such a great question, and it's actually a question I very recently asked myself,
Yeah.
because in the behavioral science space, there
Yeah.
are certifications that you can do, and there are sort of governing bodies that you can belong to and things like that. So I've often asked myself, do I need to go the next step? And I think you're right. Like, I don't think it is always necessary. It comes down to how you position yourself in the space. And I think it also comes down to what that extra certification would give you. Like,
Yeah.
is the industry asking for it? So
Right.
like if you're in a space like actuaries and CAs and things, where it's like
Yeah.
it's a very specific profession, there you
Yeah.
do need those qualifications. But something
Uh-huh.
like for myself in the R&D space, it wouldn't make a difference to my company. It would
Yeah.
really just be like for me to tack on those extra letters.
Yeah.
So it would never be. So I really think it's questioning the value that extra time and effort would give you, and is there a different way that you could spend that time and effort?
Yeah.
So if it is another certification, could you rather spend the time doing getting practical experience,
Yeah.
or is there something else that aligns with your interest? And I would never suggest that someone chases a qualification for a job. Like,
Yeah.
rather chase the qualification because you want it. It was the
Yeah.
same for me when I started my PhD. Like, I went into it knowing that it might not impact me from a career perspective, but it would definitely impact me from a personal growth perspective. And I think it's the same with other qualifications, that you could go and do the qualification, but might still not do it, make a difference.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have the passion for it and didn't align with your interests, you've done it for a completely extrinsic reason.
Yes. Yes. So I love that answer because I have seen people chase down certifications and degrees, hoping that it will help them open a better door. And I always challenge people. I would tell people, I said, I have all the degrees, right? And I'm telling you that chasing the degree or chasing the certification simply because you think it's going to help you get a better job is not always a good idea. But do it because you want to do it and it's going to enhance your knowledge and experience. Thank you so much. That was so helpful. As we come towards the end, and this has been such a great conversation, Jackie, thank you so much. If somebody wants to do what you're doing, right? If you're looking back at that PhD student that is almost done with their PhD program and may want to do something like you're doing, what advice would you give them?
So I guess so. So speaking to the me that was almost finished, there were times during the research, especially because I did part-time, there were times where I was very ready to give up because it was a very long and very difficult journey. And it's one of those things where my family didn't understand the work. They didn't understand what I was doing. They were supportive, but they didn't understand. And similarly, my peers in work and my friends didn't, so I didn't have anyone to lean on. It might be different if you are a full-time academic, but the PhD journey it's a solitary one at times. So what I would always tell myself, looking back to me from a year ago, it's keep pushing on, because the satisfaction you get at the end of being able to look back on the whole journey and look at all the work that you've done and the end product is so worth it. And that's like, so I've had a few people ask me, should they do a PhD? And I always start with saying, like, ask yourself why you want to do it. But as long as you're being true to yourself, I would always recommend it from a personal growth perspective. And then from a career perspective, I would tell myself to also keep going, because even though work is sometimes hard, and you don't necessarily always know where your career path will take you, if you stick true to your values and your interests, and every step that you're doing is taking you on your path and not someone else's, your boss's path or, your company's path, as long as you're sticking true to yourself, you will get to the right place. And maybe going back to your statement that you made about having degrees open doors for you. It's not the degree that opens the door. It's what you do with the degree that opens doors. So I think that would be the advice, is stick with the degree because it'll be worth it in the end, but then do something with it. Don't just expect people to open doors for you.
For you, exactly. Thank you. That was perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackie Noki.